The snowstorm raged across rural Quebec like nature's fury unleashed, whiteout conditions obscuring everything except a stone church on the hill. Inside, a newborn's cry pierced the silence, frail but determined to be heard. In a wooden cradle lay a baby boy, abandoned, eyes clouded white, unseeing. That same night, across Montreal, a girl was born in the back room of a small diner, her mother too poor to afford a hospital birth. Two children cast adrift by fate. One in darkness, one in poverty. Years later in Toronto, Emily Sinclair stands at the window of her penthouse office, the financial district glittering below. Bay Street calls her the oracle, a billionaire who rose from nothing. But tonight, as unfamiliar music drifts from her sound system, her perfectly manicured fingers tremble. "Find him," she whispers, a tear sliding down her cheek as the haunting notes of a cello fill the room. "Whatever it costs." Sister Marie's lantern cast dancing shadows as she pushed through knee-deep snow. The wind tore at her woolen coat, threatening to extinguish the flame. When she reached the church steps, her breath caught in her throat. There in a wooden cradle lay an infant, skin blue-tinged from cold, wailing so softly she might have missed it beneath the storm's howl. But it was the child's eyes that pierced her heart, open wide but milky white, staring at nothing and everything. "Oh, poor little one," she whispered, lifting the snow-dusted note tucked beside him. The ink ran in rivulets, but she could still make out the desperate scrawl, "Born January 15, 1980. My son cannot see. I have nothing to give him but abandonment. Please forgive me." She gathered the tiny bundle against her chest, feeling the frantic heartbeat through the thin blanket. "Your mother loved you," she murmured, though she knew no words could heal such a wound. "She just couldn't keep you." Sister Marie named him Nathan, gift from God, though his world would always be shadow. 300 kilometers away in Montreal, in a cramped apartment above a Rue Saint Catherine laundromat, another mother wept as she cradled her newborn daughter. Catherine Taylor had fled an abusive relationship 8 months pregnant, arriving in Montreal with nothing but $40 and her grandmother's silver locket. "Emily," she whispered to the infant with eyes dark and alert, taking in everything. "You will have what I never had. You will rise from where I have fallen." The days in St. Michael's Monastery passed in quiet rhythm. Nathan learned to distinguish morning by the chapel bell's resonance, noon by the warmth on the stone courtyard, and evening by the scent of pine that Sister Marie brought in before prayers. Villagers whispered when they saw him. Some left offerings, homemade bread, maple syrup, but most cast pitying glances that Nathan couldn't see but somehow always felt. "What use is a blind child?" they murmured, not unkindly but with the pragmatism of rural Quebecois who lived by their hands and eyes. "Better if the blizzard had taken him." The sister would simply smile, smoothing Nathan's auburn hair. "He hears what you cannot," she would tell them. "And one day, you will hear him." In Montreal, little Emily sat on a stack of phone books in the back of her mother's diner, writing endless columns of numbers. Catherine worked 18-hour days, hands perpetually raw from hot dishes and harsh detergents. "Why do we have so little when others have so much?" Emily asked once, watching a businessman pay for coffee with $100 bill. Catherine wiped her hands on her apron. "Because life gives different starting lines." But the finish, she tapped her daughter's forehead, "that depends on what's in here." Neither child could have known how their divergent beginnings would one day converge. The blind monastery boy and the waitress's daughter in a symphony of redemption neither could have imagined. Nathan was 5 when Sister Marie first took him to the frozen lake near the monastery. The January air bit at their cheeks, but the stillness held magic. "Listen," she said, guiding his small hand to touch the ice surface. "What do you hear?" Nathan tilted his head, those cloudy eyes half closed in concentration. "The ice is singing," he finally said. "It remembers being summer water." The sister felt a chill despite her heavy coat. The child spoke this way often as if his blindness let him perceive connections others missed. While other children sledded down monastery hills, Nathan learned to navigate by sound: the crunch of snow beneath different boots, the distinctive creak of each wooden door, the hollow echo of the stone chapel versus the warm acoustics of the library. His fingers became his eyes, reading the world's texture, the smooth polished wood of chapel pews, the rough bark of the ancient maple trees, the delicate patterns of frost on windows. "You have a gift," Sister Marie told him one evening as they sat shelling peas for soup, her arthritic fingers struggling with the task that his nimble ones completed effortlessly. "What gift?" he asked, genuinely confused. "I can't see." "Precisely," she said. "So you must truly listen, truly feel." The others look but rarely see. Across in Montreal, 8-year-old Emily Taylor sat cross-legged on her bed, illuminated by the harsh fluorescent light of their basement apartment. Textbooks surrounded her like a fortress. Her mother had leveraged every connection in their neighborhood to get Emily into Westmount Academy on scholarship. "Your classmates were born at the finish line," Catherine reminded her daughter as she helped her with the second-hand uniform. "You must run twice as fast, be twice as smart." And she was. Emily absorbed numbers like the Quebec earth absorbs spring rain effortlessly, insatiably. While other girls her age traded friendship bracelets, she calculated compound interest in the margins of her notebook. When teachers asked what she wanted to be when she grew up, her answer never wavered: "Wealthy enough that no one can hurt us." Nathan's 10th birthday arrived with unusual commotion at the monastery. A visiting music professor from McGill University had come on retreat and noticed Nathan sitting beneath the maple tree, tapping complex rhythms against its trunk. "The boy has music in his hands," Professor Lambert observed to Sister Marie. The following week, he returned with a gift: an old cello, worn but lovingly maintained. "My father played this instrument," he explained. "But I think it's been waiting for different hands." Nathan's fingers explored the cello, the smooth curves of its body, the taut strings vibrating with possibility. When he first drew the bow across them, the sound was screeching, discordant. "Patience," Professor Lambert counseled. "Listen not just with your ears, but with your heart." Nathan practiced relentlessly. His fingers bled, then calloused. At first, Sister Marie would wince at the sounds emanating from the garden. But gradually, something changed. Notes became phrases. Phrases became melodies. By his 11th birthday, Nathan could play simple Bach pieces that made visitors stop in wonder. "How does he know where to place his fingers?" they'd whisper. "He sees with his hands," Sister Marie would answer. "And hears with his soul." Music gave Nathan language for emotions he couldn't name: the loneliness of being different, the yearning for a family he'd never known, the gratitude for Sister Marie's unwavering love. In Montreal, Emily discovered her own instrument: mathematics. At 12, she won her school's financial literacy competition, creating a theoretical investment portfolio that outperformed even the teacher's examples. "You have a gift," her economics teacher, Mr. Bennett, told her. "You see patterns others miss." Emily didn't explain that survival had taught her to spot opportunity, that when you've known hunger, you never overlook resources others waste. Mr. Bennett recommended her for a scholarship to a prestigious business summer camp in Toronto. There, surrounded by children of privilege, Emily's different perspective proved invaluable. While others learned investment theory from textbooks, Emily applied street-level understanding of human behavior. People don't make financial decisions logically, she explained to her astonished group when their market simulation succeeded. They make them emotionally, especially when scared or hopeful. By 14, Emily was managing small investments for teachers and neighbors, turning modest sums into surprising returns. The first time Nathan truly played the cello, snow was falling silently outside the monastery windows. For 3 months, he had practiced each movement Professor Lambert demonstrated, his fingers memorizing positions, his body learning to become the instrument's extension. But this night was different. As snowflakes gathered on the ancient glass, something unlocked inside him. His bow moved across the strings, not mimicking learned patterns but creating new ones that somehow captured winter's voice, its solitude, its hush, its strange beauty. Sister Marie, passing by the music room, stopped in the doorway. Tears traced paths down her weathered face. In all her years, she had never heard music speak so clearly without words. When the final note faded, she asked softly, "What were you playing?" Nathan turned toward her voice, his expression startled as if waking from a dream. "I was playing What It Feels Like to Be Left in the Snow." Word spread through the village. People who had pitied the blind orphan began visiting the monastery at dusk when Nathan practiced. They would sit silently in the chapel pews, farmers with caul-used hands and women with tired eyes, listening as this child without sight somehow made visible the invisible landscapes of emotion. A visiting conductor from the Montreal Symphony happened upon one such gathering. Maestro Richard Bergeron had come to the countryside seeking peace, not expecting to find a prodigy playing heart songs to villagers. "The boy needs proper training," he told Sister Marie afterward. "He has a rare gift, what we call absolute pitch combined with extraordinary emotional intelligence." "And what would become of him in the city?" she asked, protective. "A blind boy who has never left these monastery grounds." The maestro removed his glasses, cleaning them thoughtfully. "Perhaps he would suffer. Perhaps he would soar. But shouldn't the choice be his?" In Toronto, Emily Taylor sat in the university library, surrounded by graduate students twice her age. At 17, she was the youngest person ever admitted to the prestigious finance program at the University of Toronto. Her scholarship covered tuition but little else. She still lived with her mother in a small apartment in Parkdale, commuting an hour each way to campus. That morning, she'd received the letter she'd been waiting for, an internship at Blackwood Investments. But joy had quickly soured to dismay when she saw the stipulation, business formal attire required. Looking down at her second-hand clothes, Emily calculated the cost of a professional wardrobe against their meager savings. It was mathematically impossible. As she walked through the financial district, the glass towers reflected the winter sun like crystal monoliths. So close, yet still beyond reach. Her phone buzzed, an unfamiliar number. "Miss Taylor? This is William Hargrove from the Canadian Future Leaders Foundation. Your finance professor suggested we speak. We have a special grant for exceptional students from challenging backgrounds, and—" "I don't need charity," she interrupted, pride stiffening her spine despite the worn solace of her boots. "It's not charity, Miss Taylor. It's investment. And unlike most investments, this one's guaranteed. We've reviewed your academic record. People with your mind don't stay poor unless the system keeps them there. We're simply removing an arbitrary barrier." 2 weeks later, dressed in a crisp navy suit she still couldn't quite believe belonged to her, Emily stepped into the elevator at Blackwood Investments. As the doors closed, she caught a glimpse of her reflection, no longer a waitress's daughter, but a young woman poised to conquer. What she couldn't know was that 16 floors above, in the executive boardroom, Harrison Blackwood, the ruthless CEO who would one day become both her greatest adversary and unlikely ally, was about to make a decision that would irrevocably alter both their destinies. Nathan sat perfectly still as the train lurched forward from Quebec City toward Montreal, one hand gripping the worn leather seat, the other clutching his cello case. At 15, he was leaving the only home he'd ever known. Sister Marie had passed 6 months earlier, her final whispered words still echoing in his mind: "Find your music, find yourself." Maestro Bergeron had arranged everything: a place at the Conservatoire de Musique de Montréal, a small stipend, a room with a retired music teacher near the school. But paperwork and arrangements couldn't prepare Nathan for the assault of Montreal: the constant traffic noise, the press of bodies in the metro, the thousand unfamiliar scents and sounds that offered no reference points. "You'll adjust," the maestro assured him, guiding him through crowded streets. "The city has its own rhythms, just different from your monasteries." But those first weeks nearly broke him. Nathan, who had navigated monastery grounds with confident grace, now stumbled through an urban labyrinth where nothing stayed still. His landlady rearranged furniture to clean properly. Street performers shifted locations daily. Even the air changed constantly: exhaust fumes and restaurant scents replacing the clean forest air he'd used as markers. One snowy afternoon, hopelessly lost after classes, Nathan sat on an unfamiliar bench, his clothes soaked, his cello protected beneath his coat. He felt smaller than he had as an abandoned infant. An old man's voice cut through his misery. "You're the monastery musician, aren't you? I heard you play at the conservatory yesterday." Nathan nodded, unable to place the voice. "I'm Jean-Pierre. I was blind until I was 40, a construction accident. For 15 years, I've been able to see with my eyes, but sometimes I still close them to remember how to truly listen." He touched Nathan's shoulder. "The city frightens you because you're trying to grasp it all at once. Don't. Just as your music finds one note at a time, find the city one corner, one sound, one person at a time." This simple advice changed everything. Nathan began creating a mental map, not of visual landmarks but of sound signatures. The church bell in Old Montreal that rang with a slight crack. The particular squeak of the gate near his apartment. The rhythm of the metro trains arriving at stations. By his 16th birthday, he moved through Montreal with near independence, and his performances at the conservatory had begun drawing attention beyond academic circles. In Toronto, Emily Taylor stared at the trading terminal, watching numbers flow across the screen like a symphony she could conduct with her mind. At 25, she had already risen to become the youngest vice president at Hargrove Capital. Her modest condo in Liberty Village contained little but books and a bed she rarely used during 60-hour work weeks. "The Taylor algorithm strikes again," her colleague Marcus remarked, nodding at the climbing stocks in her portfolio. "How do you see patterns no one else catches?" Emily didn't answer. Her gift was intuitive. She perceived relationships between seemingly unrelated market factors the way musicians hear harmony in separate notes. That evening, Harrison Blackwood himself called her to his office, an unprecedented honor for someone at her level. "You've made us 19 million this quarter," he said without preamble, his steel-gray eyes assessing her. 22.6, she corrected reflexively, then flushed. To her surprise, he laughed, a sound rarely heard on the 40th floor. Even better. I'm creating a special division. High risk, high reward investments in emerging Canadian industries. I want you to run it. Emily felt her heart race. Which sectors? Clean energy and Arctic development primarily. The Northwest Passage is opening. Someone's going to make billions. I want it to be us. He slid a file across his desk. Your budget is 80 million. Don't lose it. That night, in her condo overlooking the CN Tower, Emily opened the bottle of champagne she'd been saving since her first six-figure bonus. Tomorrow she would begin building her team. In 6 months, she would make her first scouting trip to the Canadian Arctic. Two souls shaped by deprivation were rising toward their destinies, unaware of the collision course fate had set. The Fairmont Chateau Frontenac gleamed with old-world opulence, polished brass, crystal chandeliers, staff in crisp uniforms. Emily Sinclair, now using her grandmother's maiden name, strode through the lobby with the confident poise of someone accustomed to commanding rooms. At 32, she'd built Sinclair Investments into a billion-dollar operation, her instinct for emerging markets almost supernatural in its accuracy. Miss Sinclair, welcome to Quebec City, the manager effused, personally escorting her to the presidential suite. Your team arrived yesterday. They mentioned you might extend your stay for the winter festival. Emily nodded absently, her mind already cycling through tomorrow's meetings with government officials. This trip was crucial. Arctic development regulations were changing, and being first to navigate the new landscape meant capturing market share her competitors wouldn't even know existed yet. Also, the manager added, the ticket package you requested has been delivered to your suite. The package was a dossier on local cultural luminaries, potential goodwill ambassadors for Western investment. Harrison had emphasized the importance of aligning with respected figures. Money isn't enough anymore, he'd explained. We need faces the public trusts. Later that evening, Emily sat cross-legged on the hotel bed, flipping through profiles, authors, painters, musicians. She paused at a photograph of a man in his early 30s, seated with a cello. There was something arresting about his face, handsome but with an otherworldly quality, eyes focused slightly above the camera. The biography was sparse: Nathan Laron, cellist extraordinaire, blind from birth, discovered in rural Quebec monastery. National arts treasure, creator of the Music Without Barriers Foundation serving disabled children. On impulse, Emily checked her itinerary. His name appeared under tomorrow's gala, a charity event she'd planned to skip in favor of prep work. 20 kilometers away, in a modest apartment filled with books on tape and recording equipment, Nathan ran his fingers over his performance attire, a charcoal suit with subtle texture he could appreciate through touch. At 33, he'd become an unlikely celebrity, his music transcending cultural barriers, his name synonymous with Quebec's cultural renaissance. Another hotel ballroom full of rich people eating tiny food, teased his manager, Michel. Your favorite? Nathan smiled. They write large checks for the foundation. I can endure small portions. Though he joked, these events exhausted him, the superficial conversations, the thinly veiled pity beneath admiration, the constant necessity to be an inspiration rather than simply an artist. But tonight's gala hosted international investors whose corporate philanthropy could fund a new school for visually impaired children. Besides, Michel added, checking his phone, Sinclair Investments CEO herself is attending, apparently quite the powerhouse. If we impress her, that's potentially millions for the foundation. Nathan nodded, though corporate patronage left him ambivalent. Too often, charity came with expectation of gratitude, of brand alignment, of becoming a feel-good story in annual reports. The gala buzzed with the particular energy of wealth and influence. Emily moved through the crowd efficiently, making necessary connections, cataloging useful information. When the lights dimmed for the evening's entertainment, she remained standing near the bar, half attending while reviewing notes on her phone. Then the first note sounded, a single, pure tone that seemed to vibrate not just in the air but somehow within her. Emily looked up. The man from the dossier sat alone on the stage, his cello balanced perfectly, his expression one of complete absorption. The music that flowed from his hands wasn't merely beautiful, it was revelatory. Each phrase conveyed emotion with such clarity that words seemed crude by comparison. Without conscious decision, Emily moved closer to the stage, her phone forgotten in her hand. The piece built from simple longing to complex grief to something transcendent, acceptance, perhaps, or hard-won peace. When it ended, the silence felt almost holy before applause shattered it. Emily remained motionless, aware of moisture on her cheeks. She couldn't remember the last time she had cried. After the performance, donors clustered around Nathan, Michelle facilitating introductions. Emily hung back, uncharacteristically uncertain. Something about the music had reached past her carefully constructed professional veneer and touched the part of herself she'd long ago locked away, the girl who had once known true hunger, true fear. When the crowd thinned, she approached. "Mr. Laron, I'm Emily Sinclair from Sinclair Investments." Nathan turned toward her, voice inclining his head slightly. "Miss Sinclair, your reputation precedes you. As does yours. Your performance was..." She paused, searching for a word that wouldn't sound trite. "Truthful." A genuine smile replaced his polite one. "That's perhaps the best compliment I've received. Most people say moving or inspiring words that describe their reaction rather than the music itself. Truth often moves us, whether we want it to or not," she replied, then surprised herself by adding, "I grew up poor too. Not blind, but, in another kind of darkness." The moment the words left her mouth, Emily froze. She never spoke of her past, not to colleagues, not to the few men she'd dated, not even to herself in unguarded moments. Nathan's expression softened. "Then you understand that darkness isn't always about what's missing. Sometimes it's about what you find instead." Snow fell silently past the floor-to-ceiling windows of Emily's Toronto office, the city lights blurred into watercolor smudges 40 stories below. 3 months had passed since the Quebec City Gala. 3 months of unexpected correspondence with Nathan, first formal emails about the foundation, then voice messages exchanged like modern-day letters, gradually revealing the architecture of two souls shaped by deprivation. On her desk sat the contract Harrison had praised as brilliant maneuvering. Sinclair Investments would become the primary sponsor of Nathan's Music Without Barriers Foundation, a tax-advantageous arrangement that positioned them favorably with both Quebec officials and international watchdogs. What Harrison didn't know, what no one knew, was that Emily had personally matched the corporate contribution, anonymously. Nor did he know she had begun taking evening walks without her phone, or that she sometimes sat in darkened rooms listening to recordings of Nathan's performances, or that for the first time in 20 years, she was asking herself, "What am I building, and why?" Her intercom buzzed. "Miss Sinclair, your 4 o'clock is here. The team from legal with the Arctic development papers. Send them in." She straightened her shoulders, professionalism sliding back into place like a well-tailored jacket. The meeting proceeded efficiently until they reached the section on environmental impact. These figures represent compensation for potential disruption, she asked, finger hovering over a surprisingly low number. The lead counsel nodded. Standard rates for the region. Northern officials have already signed off, they're eager for development. And the communities? How many indigenous families? He shrugged. About 200 in the development zone. The relocation site is already prepared, basic housing units about 30 kilometers from their current location. Emily felt something cold settle in her stomach. 30 kilometers from their traditional hunting grounds. From their cultural sites. From the communities they built over generations. Miss Sinclair, with respect, this is how development works in remote regions. We're already exceeding federal requirements for compensation. If we start playing humanitarian, our margins. Bring me revised numbers by tomorrow, she interrupted. Triple the compensation, and find a way to develop around the communities, not through them. And I want plans for a vocational training center added to the development focused on jobs for local residents. The lawyer blanched. Mr. Blackwood has already approved this budget. These changes would require his. I'll handle Harrison, she said, her tone foreclosing further discussion. After they left, Emily remained at her desk as darkness gathered outside. The snow had stopped, leaving the glass clear, the city sharp-edged again. She activated her private line. Nathan? It's Emily. I need your perspective on something. In Montreal, Nathan sat on his balcony, a heat lamp keeping the winter chill at bay as he held the phone to his ear. Emily's voice precise, controlled, but with an undercurrent of something troubled had become a fixture in his life, a connection as unexpected as it was increasingly essential. He listened as she outlined the situation with the Arctic Development Project. You're asking if you should risk your professional standing to help people you'll never meet, he summarized when she finished. I'm asking if it matters, if it makes any difference. They'll still be marginalized. The system will still favor development over tradition. I can't change the fundamental equations. Nathan considered this. When I was 12, a wealthy philanthropist visited the conservatory. After hearing me play, he handed me an envelope. For a proper cello, he said. I later learned it contained enough money for several professional instruments. Did it change your life? Emily asked. Not in the way he intended. I kept my old cello, it was an extension of me by then. But I used his money to pay for 3 children from my village to attend music classes for 2 years. Did that solve systemic inequality? No. But Marie is now a teacher. Thomas is a sound engineer. Claire runs a successful music therapy practice. He paused. We cannot change systems overnight. But we can change constants to variables, one life at a time. Silence stretched between them, spanning provinces. I'm coming to Toronto next month, he finally said. For a series of benefit concerts. I'd like to meet with you, not just by phone. I'd like that too, Emily replied, her voice softer than he'd ever heard it. What neither said, what both perhaps already knew, was that they had begun to serve as each other's eyes, she seeing the physical world with a clarity he never could, he perceiving emotional landscapes she had long ago learned to avoid. 2 weeks later, Harrison Blackwood called Emily into his office, his expression thunderous. You rewrote an approved development plan without consultation, he began without preamble. You committed an additional $15 million to a project already stretching our exposure in a volatile region. Emily held his gaze. I improved it? The new plan reduces community resistance, generates positive press which will help with regulatory approvals, and creates long-term goodwill in a market we're just beginning to penetrate. That's not the point. You circumvented process. You behaved as if this were your company, not ours. His use of ours wasn't lost on her. Despite her success, despite building a division that had doubled the firm's overall growth, she remained outside the inner circle tolerated for her brilliance but never fully embraced. Perhaps it should be, she heard herself say. Harrison's eyebrows shot up. Excuse me. My division. It should be mine, a separate entity under the Hargrove umbrella. Same profit-sharing arrangement, but with autonomy on approach and execution. He stared at her as if she'd suggested they conduct business in ineptitude. That's not how this works, Emily. You're an employee, a valued one, but still an employee. Then perhaps I should be elsewhere. The words emerged with a clarity that surprised her. RBC has approached me twice this year. So has BMO. I've said no out of loyalty, but loyalty should be reciprocal. For the first time in their long association, she saw genuine alarm cross Harrison's face. Let's not be hasty, he said, his tone shifting. I've always seen your potential. Perhaps it's time we discussed your future here more concretely. As she left his office, Emily felt a strange lightness. The threat had been a calculated risk she had no intention of leaving until her own plans crystallized. But something more significant had shifted. For years, she had defined herself by this building, these glass towers, this pursuit of wealth and power. Now, as she looked out over the Toronto skyline, she wondered what else she might become. Roy Thompson Hall hummed with anticipation. Nathan's national tour had sold out months in advance, but tonight's Toronto performance carried special significance. All proceeds would launch a groundbreaking music therapy program for children with disabilities. Backstage, Nathan adjusted his cuffs, the familiar pre-performance stillness settling over him. 15 years of concerts across 3 continents, yet each time felt like the first. The same flutter of nerves, the same prayer that his music would speak what words could not. 5 minutes, Mr. Laron, the stage manager murmured. Nathan nodded, fingers automatically checking his cello, not the monastery instrument, long since preserved in a museum, but one crafted by Quebec's finest luthier, its tone so pure it seemed to vibrate in harmony with his thoughts. A different voice cut through his concentration, one he'd come to know intimately through late-night calls spanning provinces. I've been told artists don't like interruptions before performances, Emily said, but I couldn't wait until after. He smiled, turning toward her. For you, an exception. Though he couldn't see her, Nathan had formed a mental image of Emily Sinclair. Her voice suggested precision, control, a carefully maintained distance from the world. But recently, that voice had revealed more vulnerability beneath vigilance, warmth behind walls. I brought someone who wanted to meet you, she continued, an unusual hesitation in her tone. Someone who's traveled a very long way. Nathan tilted his head, registering a second presence, the subtle scent of lavender and wool, the soft rustle of modest clothing, a breathing pattern that suggested advanced age and emotional tension. Nathan, Emily said gently, this is Margaret Laron. She's from a small town near your monastery. She says she knew your mother. The air seemed to vanish from the room. In 35 years, no one had ever spoken of his biological parents. The monastery, the conservatory, the concert halls, these were his origins as far as public narrative went. How did you? He began. After we spoke last month about your birth village, I had investigators visit the area, Emily explained. They found Mrs. Laron, who remembered a young woman who lived in her apartment building before you were born. Nathan felt a wrinkled hand tentatively touch his, fingers trembling. Your mother's name was Claire, the old woman said in Quebecois French, her voice quavering. She cleaned houses in our neighborhood until she was 8 months pregnant. So young, barely 20. Her family had disowned her. The baby's father was a musician who left for Europe. Nathan stood perfectly still, his heart hammering. These were details he'd never dared imagine, facts that gave shape to the void where his origins should have been. She loved you, Margaret continued. Every night, I would hear her singing lullabies through the wall. But then came the terrible winter of 1980. The heating in our building failed. We had no electricity for weeks. She stayed at a shelter first, growing more desperate each day. Nathan felt tears form, his composer's control crumbling. Why did she leave me? The old woman's grip tightened. To save you. The shelters were overcrowded, disease spreading everywhere. That winter took many children. She left her most precious belonging with you. Did they tell you that? Her father's watch. She said you would need something beautiful if she couldn't give you a beautiful life. Nathan's hand flew to his pocket, where he always carried a small object, a broken pocket watch Sister Marie had found tucked in his blankets, too damaged to work but preserved nonetheless. All these years, he'd carried his mother's treasured keepsake without knowing. Did she? He couldn't finish the question. She went to Montreal to find work, Margaret said softly. But the following year, when pneumonia swept through the homeless shelters. Her silence completed the sentence with devastating clarity. On stage, the orchestra had begun tuning. The stage manager approached again, his whispered 2 minutes almost apologetic. Nathan nodded blindly, his world reshaping itself around this new knowledge. Emily's hand found his shoulder, her touch conveying what words couldn't, that she understood the earthquake of identity, the aftershocks of truth. I'll bring Mrs. Laron to your dressing room after the performance, she promised. You'll have time. Somehow Nathan found his way to the stage, muscle memory carrying him when conscious thought couldn't. As he settled before the audience, a profound silence fell not just in the hall but within himself. The noise of 35 years' questions, doubts, theories suddenly stilled. He began to play not the program planned for months, but something new, something being composed in real time. The music flowed from a place beyond technique or training, each note carrying fragments of a story finally made whole, a young mother's love, a desperate choice, a lifetime of consequence. In the front row, Emily watched, witnessing the moment a man's art transcended from brilliant to immortal. Beside her sat Margaret Laron, tears streaming unchecked down weathered cheeks. Behind them, unnoticed in the darkened theater, Harrison Blackwood observed with uncharacteristic emotion. He had come prepared to discuss Emily's proposal for a new corporate structure, to negotiate terms that would keep his most valuable asset from departing. Instead, he found himself confronting an unexpected question. In his 50 years of acquiring wealth and power, had he ever created anything that touched the human spirit as directly as the blind man on stage? Had he ever known the kind of connection so evident between Emily and this remarkable artist? The music reached its crescendo, not a triumph but a reconciliation, the sound of a soul making peace with its origins. As the final note hung in the air, the audience remained suspended in collective breath, as if waking too suddenly might shatter something precious. Then, as one, they rose, not merely applauding but acknowledging they had witnessed something sacred. A truth made beautiful through its telling. Backstage, after 3 encores, Nathan found Emily waiting with Margaret Laron. The elderly woman pressed something into his hands, a small, worn book. Her poetry collection, she explained. I've kept it all these years. Your mother left it with me for safekeeping. It belongs with you now. As his fingers traced the faded cover, Nathan felt a circle closing, not an ending but a completion. Thank you, he said, the words inadequate but all he had. Then, turning to Emily, and you, how can I ever repay you for this gift? She took his hand, her customary armor nowhere in evidence. You already have. You've reminded me why we build anything at all, not for wealth or power, but for moments like this. Connections that matter. 6 months after the Toronto concert, a small crowd gathered on the outskirts of Nathan's birth village in rural Quebec. The morning frost still clung to the maple trees, but the spring sun promised warmth as it rose over distant hills. At the center of attention stood a modern one-story building, simple but elegant, with wide pathways, gardens, and specialized tactile features throughout. The Claire Laron School for Visually Impaired Children was ready to welcome its first students. Nathan stood near the entrance, fingers tracing the Braille inscription beneath the main sign. Beside him, Emily surveyed their creation with quiet satisfaction. What had begun as a corporate philanthropy project had evolved into something much more personal and more revolutionary. The first teacher candidates arrive next week, she said. 15 are visually impaired themselves, with university degrees they haven't been able to use until now. Nathan nodded. And the students? 37 confirmed for the first term. The youngest is 4, found in foster care in Winnipeg. The oldest is 16, she's been homeschooled her whole life because local schools couldn't accommodate her needs. He winced at the familiar story. And the music program? Instruments arrive tomorrow. We've secured visiting instructors from across Canada, and the recording studio will be operational next month. She paused. The board approved the expanded scholarships. No child will be turned away for financial reasons. The board was a carefully balanced entity, half Quebec cultural leaders, half Canadian business figures. Harrison Blackwood had surprised everyone by accepting a seat, and even more by personally matching Sinclair Investments' substantial endowment. You've changed him, Nathan observed, hearing the skepticism in her voice whenever she mentioned her former boss. Perhaps. Or perhaps he's always understood value, just defined it too narrowly. Emily watched local children cautiously approach the new building, their curiosity overcoming initial shyness. Though I think it was actually you who reached him. Your music does that, finds the human behind the persona. The official opening ceremony would begin soon. Government officials, corporate sponsors, and media had already started arriving. But Nathan had insisted on this quiet moment beforehand, a private honoring of the journey. From his pocket, he withdrew the broken pocket watch, the one that had been tucked into his blankets as an infant. Now restored to working condition by a master watchmaker in Montreal, though he'd kept the original cracked face as a reminder. 2 mothers, he said softly. One gave me life, one gave me purpose. This place honors both. Emily stood beside him, her hand finding his, a gesture that had become natural between them, a language of support that required no words. The formidable businesswoman who had once measured all value in dollars and market share now found herself invested in currencies far more meaningful. I've been offered the Asia-Pacific position, she said quietly, breaking news she'd held close for weeks. CEO of all Blackwood's operations east of Vancouver. Nathan nodded slowly. He'd anticipated this moment. Success demanded movement, and Emily Sinclair had never been one to decline ascension. "When do you leave?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. "I don't." He turned toward her, confused. "I declined it," she explained. "I'm establishing my own firm instead. Smaller, more selective, headquartered here in Quebec and in Toronto. Companies that meet specific ethical criteria, with mandatory reinvestment in social impact projects. But you've worked toward that position for a version of myself that no longer exists," she finished. "Success looks different to me now." Behind them, official cars began arriving, doors opening to discharge dignitaries. Their private moment was ending, the public one about to begin. Soon Nathan would play the composition he'd written for the occasion, two mothers already being hailed by critics who'd heard rehearsals as his most profound work. "There's something else," Emily said, her typically confident voice suddenly uncertain. "The renovations on the director's residence are complete. 2 bedrooms, a music studio, fully adapted for accessibility, with room for a guide dog if you decide." "Are you asking me to be the school's director?" Nathan interrupted, surprised. "I thought we'd agreed on Professor Martel from the conservatory." "We did." Emily took a breath. "I'm asking if you'd consider making this village your home again. With me. At least part of the year, between your concerts and my business." The proposition hung between them, not just a professional arrangement but a personal one, the logical culmination of months of growing closeness, of boundaries dissolving like morning frost under rising sun. Before Nathan could respond, they were interrupted by an aide announcing the ceremony would begin in 5 minutes. The moment fractured, the answer deferred. As they rose, Nathan kept hold of Emily's hand. "We should join the others," he said. "But tonight, after everyone leaves, I'd like to play something for you alone. Something I've been composing since Toronto." "What's it called?" she asked. He smiled, the genuine smile few people ever saw, unguarded and full of light. "I'm calling it The Investment. About a woman who built fortunes but discovered her greatest returns came from what she gave rather than what she kept." For Emily Sinclair, who had spent a lifetime translating the world into numbers and projections, the equation suddenly simplified to its essence. What remained when everything extraneous fell away was not achievement or acquisition, but connection to this extraordinary man, to the children who would find their voices here, to a purpose larger than personal gain. As they walked toward the waiting crowd, navigating together as they had learned to do, her quiet descriptions guiding his steps, his perceptive listening catching nuances she might miss, both understood they had found their way out of different kinds of darkness into shared light. The school bell rang, clear and perfect in the morning air, its first sounding, but far from its last. 1 year after the school's opening, Nathan stood in the garden, listening to children's voices from the music room, tentative notes finding harmony, occasional laughter when mistakes turned into unexpected discoveries. 28 students now lived on campus, with another 45 attending daily from surrounding villages. What had begun as an educational facility had grown into a community nexus, the boundaries between school and village increasingly permeable. "Mr. Nathan." A small hand found his. I played the whole song without stopping. He recognized 7-year-old Sophie by her touch, confident, slightly impatient, always in motion. Blind since a car accident at 3, she'd arrived withdrawn and silent. Now her voice rang with the particular pride of a child discovering her own capabilities. "That's wonderful," he said, kneeling to her level. "Will you play it for the spring festival next week?" "Miss Emily already asked me. She's helping me practice after dinner." He smiled at the mention of Emily, who despite maintaining offices in both Quebec City and Toronto, spent at least 2 weeks each month at the school. The business titan had revealed an unexpected gift for connecting with the children, her own childhood deprivation giving her insights that privileged teachers sometimes lacked. The sound of a car approaching pulled his attention away. Not the school's van, something heavier, expensive. He recognized the distinct purr of a luxury engine. Director Laurent. A man's voice, slightly hesitant. I'm James Blackwood. My father was Harrison. Nathan straightened, processing both the name and the tense. Was. He passed 3 weeks ago. Pancreatic cancer. It moved quickly. The news settled heavily. Harrison had visited the school twice, his initial skepticism gradually yielding to genuine interest. During his last visit, he'd sat in on Nathan's master class, afterward requesting a private conversation that stretched late into the evening. I'm very sorry for your loss, Nathan said sincerely. Your father was becoming a friend. James made a sound between acknowledgement and surprise. That's why I'm here. His will contained specific instructions regarding this school. Rather unusual ones, actually. Before Nathan could respond, another set of footsteps approached the precise, measured stride he would recognize anywhere. James. Emily's voice held complicated notes, professional courtesy layered over personal history. I didn't expect you until tomorrow. Emily. You look different. The young man sounded genuinely surprised. Nathan understood what James meant. The Emily who moved through the school grounds wore simple linen clothing, her hair often loosely braided rather than severely styled, her step lighter than the measured corporate stride she'd once maintained. Quebec agrees with me, she replied simply. Shall we discuss Harrison's bequest in my office? An hour later, Nathan sat beside Emily as James Blackwood outlined his father's final wishes. He left 40% of his personal fortune separate from company holdings to establish a trust for the school and similar initiatives across Canada. Approximately $300 million. Emily inhaled sharply. That's unexpected. There's more. James sounded bemused. He specifically requested that neither Blackwood Investments nor Sinclair Partners directly administer these funds. Instead, he named Nathan as primary trustee, with the board to include at least 50% visually impaired members. Nathan sat perfectly still, absorbing the magnitude of this responsibility and the insight behind it. Harrison had understood something fundamental, that true impact required shifting not just resources but control to those directly affected. He left you a personal letter, James added, placing a sealed envelope in Nathan's hands. His instructions were that you read it privately. That evening, after James departed and the school settled into its nighttime rhythm, Nathan sat in the garden with Emily, the unopened letter between them. Would you read it to me? He asked. While he could have used his text-to-speech technology, some messages deserved a human voice, particularly when the message connected 3 lives so profoundly. Emily carefully opened the envelope, Harrison's distinctive stationery rustling between her fingers. Nathan, she began, by the time you receive this, I will have left a world I spent too long measuring only in acquisitions. Our conversations last spring affected me deeply, particularly your observation that true legacy exists not in what we accumulate but in what we set free. For 40 years, I built walls around wealth. You, born with the ultimate limitation, somehow live without boundaries. Your music, your teaching, your very presence expanding rather than constraining possibilities. I once asked what you saw in Emily that lured her from the path I'd laid before her. You said, I didn't see anything. She saw herself, her true self reflected in what we're building here. You were right. The woman who sits on the floor playing with blind children bears little resemblance to the ruthless executive I cultivated, yet she's undeniably more powerful in ways that matter. My doctors give me weeks, not months. In this unexpected compression of time, priorities clarify. Use these resources wisely. Create more light from shadows. And thank you for the music, both literal and figurative, you brought to my final chapter. Emily's voice faltered on the last words. They sat in silence as darkness deepened around them, the trust of one of Canada's wealthiest men and the weight of hundreds of lives now partially in their hands. He understood, she finally said. At the end, he actually understood. Nathan nodded. People can surprise us, especially when we give them the chance to be more than their circumstances or choices have previously allowed. It was the philosophy that underpinned everything they'd built, the belief that limitation, whether physical or circumstantial, need not define potential. That resources properly directed could transform barriers into gateways. From the dormitory, a child's voice rose in song, one of the traditional Quebecois folk songs Nathan had taught, its melody carrying clearly through the evening air. Soon other voices joined, creating an impromptu chorus that spoke of belonging, of safety found after fear. Nathan reached for Emily's hand, finding it waiting for his. Their fingers intertwined with the ease of practiced connection. I've been offered a performance at Carnegie Hall, he said. With a full orchestra. They want to record it for global distribution. She squeezed his hand. That's wonderful. When? December. Winter in New York. He hesitated. I'd like you to come with me. Not just for the concert but, after. I thought perhaps we might consider a small ceremony while we're there. Something intimate, with just a few friends. The meaning registered in her sudden stillness. Nathan Laron, are you proposing marriage in the most understated way possible? He smiled, the expression transforming his serious features. I thought it fitting. The most important decisions are often spoken most quietly. Emily leaned against his shoulder, her customary self-possession momentarily abandoned as tears threatened. From ambitious child to ruthless executive, to this moment a journey as improbable as his own. Yes, she said simply. To New York, to Carnegie Hall, to marriage. To all of it. As if in response, the children's voices rose in the final verse of their song, words about light found in darkness, about hands joined to create what neither could build alone. Sometimes life's most profound illuminations come from places we least expect. Nathan and Emily's journey reminds us that our greatest limitations, whether physical blindness or emotional armor built from childhood poverty, often become the forge of our unique gifts. Nathan couldn't see the world's visual beauty, but this very limitation allowed him to hear what others missed, to translate emotional landscapes into music that penetrated pretense. His blindness became not an obstacle but a different avenue of perception, one that ultimately touched millions. Emily, shaped by early deprivation, developed extraordinary abilities to calculate value and risk. Yet her true wisdom emerged only when she expanded her definition of return on investment beyond financial metrics to the currency of human potential realized. Their story challenges us to examine our own apparent limitations. What if the very thing we consider our greatest disadvantage contains the seed of our unique contribution? What if our wounds, properly understood, become our tools for healing others? Perhaps most importantly, Nathan and Emily demonstrate that true wealth isn't measured by what we acquire but by what we liberate in ourselves and others. The monastery orphan and the waitress's daughter, through their unlikely connection, created ripples of possibility that transformed countless lives. In the end, light doesn't require the absence of darkness. It simply requires the courage to kindle what flame we can, where we are, with what we have. This story touched you for a reason. Perhaps you recognize something of yourself in Nathan's journey through darkness or in Emily's evolution beyond ambition to purpose. Maybe you're standing at your own crossroads, questioning what true success means in your life. Take a moment now to reflect, what limitation in your own story might actually contain your greatest gift? What would change if you began seeing it not as an obstacle but as a unique lens through which you perceive the world? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your insight might be exactly what another viewer needs to hear today. If this story resonated with you, subscribe to our channel for more narratives that illuminate the hidden connections between seemingly separate lives. We'll continue exploring how apparent limitations often contain unexpected blessings. Before you go, ask yourself, what small flame can I kindle today? What person, cause, or community might benefit from the unique light I carry? Then take one concrete step toward that illumination. Because the most powerful stories aren't just those we watch, they're the ones we live.